button. There we go. Okay, and to continue. Maya is also the Delaware Riverkeeper, and she is leading the watershed-based advocacy organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, and has done so for over 30 years in its efforts to protect the health of the Delaware River and its tributaries. She's a skilled activist, attorney, strategist, and community organizer, and she is the author of the Green Amendment, The People's Fight for a Clean, Safe, and Healthy Environment. So if you go on to the page that we have set up for today's event, we do have links to all of these organizations and to where you can purchase the book itself. So be sure to check that out. We'll pop that URL up before the end of today. So today we are going to have Maya along with a panel of constitutional law experts who are going to discuss those realities of implementing green amendments in Florida. And we'll introduce the panel in a little bit, but now without further ado, I do want to hand the mic over to Maya.
Now, Maya has to find her talk. Okay, good, great. Hi, well, thank you so much for having me. I know I have a loud voice, so I'll stay, wait for that. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here, and I'm really thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you about what I think is a really powerful and important pathway for environmental protection. I always do a little caveat at the beginning of my talk. I did rework this talk a little bit this morning, recognizing that this was a CLE, and so I thought, oh, better do a little bit more for lawyers, not tons, but a little bit. So, but I spent too much time with Jim and the manatees. He took me to see the lovely manatees, and so I didn't get to do a final review. So we might have a little bit of fun, a few glitches, but the manatees were more important than my final review, just FYI. So I've already had this very, very kind introduction. But yes, I am the founder of the national movement Green Amendments for the Generations, as well as the author of the book. But I think the most important thing that I want you to know about me is that I've been an environmental activist and attorney for nearly 30 years now. And it's as a result of that activism and experiencing the myriad of ways that our current system of environmental protection laws and governance fails to protect our environment, the needs and the rights of people to clean, safe, and healthy environments, that I have recognized that this current system of laws is fundamentally failing us, and that we truly do need a new pathway for protection when it comes to the environment. Now, whatever the audience, whenever I say that we need a new pathway for protection, people inevitably say to me, I don't care what state you're in, say to me, oh my gosh, Maya, why do you say we need a new pathway for protection? I mean, within our states, in every state across the nation at the federal level, we have hundreds of thousands of environmental protection laws, regulations, policies, programs, initiatives. We got all kinds of things that are supposed to be dedicated to protecting our environment. So why do you say that we need a new pathway? Well, we need a new pathway because while we do have this, as some may say, robust system of laws, regulations, and governance, what we really have in this system is we have a system that is focused on legalizing environmental pollution, degradation, and harm, rather through reviews and permits, rather than a system that is truly focused on prevention of pollution, prevention of degradation, prevention of harm to our environments and all the resulting ramifications for people, for our communities, and even for our economy. This is a system of laws that's filled with gaps and loopholes. There are many emerging contaminants. There are many, they don't even have to be emerging contaminants. There are many existing contaminants, many industries that escape regulation, escape protection under this system of laws and regulations because of gaps in the law, because of loopholes. Also under this system, all too often, there really is a failure of our government officials to robustly robustly enforce even the laws that we do have on the books. Right, wrong, or otherwise, for whatever reason, that is part of our reality. Although the truth is even if the laws on their books were implemented 100% the way that they were written, we would still have serious problems because, again, they are focused on legalizing pollution and degradation.
Sorry.
No, that's
They
okay.
can't see the.
You can't see my pictures. I'm
try
so
resharing.
sorry. We're going to reshare. Told you there'd be trouble.
Okay.
Is that working?
I think it should. So let's pull this back up for you.
Great. Okay. And under this system of laws and regulations, racism is very literally built in. So that communities of color, indigenous communities, low-income communities are consistently and repeatedly targeted for highly polluting industrial operations and environmentally degrading activities. That's just the reality of the way it is. Under this system of laws and governance, children are literally an afterthought. We are not giving them the critical protections that they need now or in the future in order to have happy, healthy, safe lives. And it is a system of laws and governance where industry has much greater access to the levers of power than the rest of us. And that is one of the ways that they can then direct what laws do get passed, what laws don't get passed. How do they get interpreted? How do they get enforced? Or how do they not get enforced? Because there is greater conversation with the industry than there is with the actual people who are being impacted by pollution and degradation. And as a result of this system of laws and governance, we have real people who are suffering real harm. And I thought that I would just read one of the stories from my book, one to give you a little bit of a taste of how the book reads, but also, to really bring this home, that when we allow pollution and degradation, we really are harming real people with what is happening on the ground. So I just wanted to share one story. This story is not a story from the state of Florida, but it doesn't matter. It could be, right? It could be from any state across our nation. So this is just from chapter 8 in the book. Gina was sick constantly, experiencing frequent gastrointestinal issues and hair loss that left her with permanent bald spots. Gina's daughter had been born with an extra ear, but no one had endured greater suffering or paid a higher price for Mount Air's callously destructive actions and pollution than Gina's son, Kiwanis. Like Gina, Kiwanis had been born with asthma. His case was particularly severe. When your asthma is at its worst, it's like somebody put a plastic bag over your head and just pulled on a string and cut off all your circulation, says Gina. He really suffered. He just suffered. But when Kiwanis left Millsboro for a year to attend school, his condition seemed to improve significantly. But then he came home, and his asthma was once again a daily source of hardship. Despite nebulizers, inhalers, prescription steroids, and an EpiPen, he struggled to keep it under control. On March 5th, 2014, Gina got a frantic phone call. While hanging out in a house full of friends, Kiwanis had suffered an extremely severe asthma attack. They were calling him an ambulance, and she needed to drive immediately to the hospital. By the time Gina arrived, Kiwanis had passed away. He was just 24 years old. I checked with his job, and he went to work early that night, and he stayed until the time to get off, Gina recalls. And he wasn't sick. He didn't tell me he was sick or anything. It was an incomprehensible loss. Just as incomprehensible was the official cause confirmed by an autopsy that took Gina 4 months to get a hold of. It said he died from an acute asthma attack, she says. And she added, and I was like, who dies from asthma anymore? Another heart-wrenching reality was that the very same pollution that likely caused Kiwanis' death had also likely affected him from the very beginning of his life. One evening, Gina sent Maria a form and asked her to take a look. It was a form for supplemental security income, a type of social security assistance for people with disabilities, which Gina had been receiving for Kiwanis. The SSI form said that he could not be educated because of a lack of oxygen to the brain, Maria recalls. And she adds, now there is no bigger crime against humanity than a child who, because of pollution exposure issues, cannot develop to be the person that they ought to be. This is a story that is actually a story that has taken place, is actually playing out right now in the state of Delaware. But again, it could just as easily be a story right here from the state of Florida. We can look at the news headlines and see how Florida's system of laws and governance on its own, complemented by federal law, is really resulting in incredible environmental pollution and degradation, resulting in your own harms, or resulting in your own stories of harm here in Florida. And we can see, right? We can see by looking at those headlines, we can see by hearing those stories that from this system of laws and government, something fundamentally important is missing. And I'm here to suggest to you that one of the things that is missing is that we do not truly recognize the rights of all people to clean water, to clean air, to a stable climate and healthy environments. Here in the United States of America, we have all kinds of fundamental rights that are recognized and protected by our state and federal constitutions. We have the right to free speech and freedom of religion. We have private property rights. We have civil rights. We have the right to bear arms. But here in the United States of America, here in the state of Florida, in states across our nation, we do not have environmental rights. We do not have a right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And yet we know as people that our environmental rights are worthy of constitutional recognition and protection on par with these other fundamental freedoms that we hold dear, that protect so many aspects of our lives. But there are some exceptions. There are actually 3 states here in the United States of America right now today, Pennsylvania, Montana, and as recently as 2021, the state of New York, that do actually recognize and protect environmental rights on par with those other fundamental freedoms. These 3 states have the appropriate constitutional language with the appropriate constitutional placement that literally lifts up environmental rights. So they are given the same enforceable constitutional standing as those other fundamental rights that we hold dear. These 3 states have what we are hoping to get here in the state of Florida, what I am hoping that we get in every state across our nation. These 3 states have what I call a constitutional green amendment, a green amendment which takes our inalienable human right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment and actually makes it meaningful and enforceable. Now, if you want to lift up environmental rights so they are given highest constitutional standing on par with these other fundamental rights in a way that is truly enforceable, not just any language anywhere in the Constitution will do. And we know that because the truth is almost every state across our nation actually does talk about the environment. Many of them even talk about environmental rights, but only those 3 states, Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York, lift up environmental rights so they are given that highest constitutional and enforceable recognition and protection. Again, Pennsylvania, Montana, and New York. You can see Florida, like so many other states, it does actually talk about the environment already, but not in the right way to get this critical layer of protection. In these other states where we see language, again, Florida, the other states where we have pre-existing language, these states fail to put the language up into the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. That's one of the fundamental failings of the 46 states that are not the 3 with constitutional green amendments. Or they might have some language in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, but what they are recognizing and protecting are things like the right to fish, hunt, and trap, the right to navigate waterways, not the right to fundamentals like clean water, clean air, a stable climate, thriving ecosystems. These states that already have existing language, particularly if they talk about the importance of environmental protection or even environmental rights, they usually begin or end the sentence with, and that's our policy. And as we know under the law, policy is advice. And in the real world, as well as in the legal world, if you're given advice, you can take it, you can ignore it, right? You don't have to follow it, and it's certainly not enforceable. So that's a fundamental problem. All those constitutional amendments are doing is giving good advice that legislative officials across the nation are ignoring. Some of these states talk about the importance of environmental protection. They even talk about environmental rights, but then they begin or end the sentence with, and the way you get these rights is your legislators pass laws in order to protect the environment. Well, we already know that that's what legislators do. Legislators are supposed to legislate. So simply giving you another promise that your legislators will legislate doesn't change the current dynamic on the ground when it's coming to the environment. See, I told you I just created this talk this morning. The other, really important thing when we're talking about this characterization that you might have a constitutional right to a healthy environment, but it's done through legislation by the legislators. Again, what that does is it gives you the right to have your legislators legislate. So as long as your legislators legislate, whether they pass good laws or bad laws or laws filled with gaps, it means that they've done their constitutional duty. You've gotten your constitutional right, but nothing actually has changed on the ground when it comes to constitutional environmental rights and getting enhanced protections for our environment. Overall, what these states do, no matter how it is that they write it or where it is they place it, overall, what these states do with their chosen language and their chosen placement is they fail to lift up environmental rights so that they are given that highest constitutional standing, recognition, and protection that we give to the other fundamental rights that we hold dear. We also know when it comes to constitutional language to protect the environment or any rights, that not just any language will do as a result of some of the recent US Supreme Court decisions that have been handed down. We can look at the Dobbs decision with regards to abortion rights, the rights of bodily autonomy for people with a uterus. It doesn't really matter what your position is on that issue. We can all see what happened in the Dobbs decision. We can see that prior to Dobbs, for 50 years, US Supreme Court justices interpreted the right to an abortion into the 14th Amendment right to privacy, but the language was not explicitly laid out there. But yet, the justices interpreted that right to an abortion into that right of privacy. But because there was no explicit recognition or protection, when another set of justices joined the court who didn't agree that all people with a uterus should have a right to an abortion, they were free to simply wipe it away with a few strokes of their pen because there was no explicit recognition and protection for the right to an abortion. So language and placement matters when it comes to any fundamental rights, including environmental rights. So what is it that we need to do if we want to lift up environmental rights and give them that highest recognition, protection, standing, and enforceability? Well, what we need to do is pass what I call green amendments. And green amendments, not just any environmental rights amendment, if you haven't figured it out yet, not just any environmental rights amendment is a green amendment, right? All green amendments are environmental rights amendments, but not all environmental rights amendments are green amendments. If you want a green amendment that gives us highest constitutional standing, recognition, and protection, you have to fulfill critical criteria. And there are a lot of them, but I'm just going to highlight a few. First off, the language has to be in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. That is a must-have, that is non-negotiable. That is where we place all of the other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear. If we want to give our environment that same constitutional standing, recognition, and protection, we have to place our environment in that same part of the Constitution. We have to be clear that we are recognizing and protecting the rights of all people. We have to be clear that we are protecting the essentials of life when it comes to the environment. Things like the right to clean water, to clean air, a stable climate, thriving ecosystems, as opposed to the right to navigate water bodies. The language needs to be self-executing. It has to have legal strength and enforceability on its own right. We have to be able to turn to the Constitution when there's a problem with regards to our environment, environmental protection, and an infringement on our environmental rights. We can't be forced to have to find some law that gives us the ability to enforce that right. It has to be self-executing in its own right. Right? This is about we, the people, taking our power back. So when we put in the Constitution that we have a right to clean and healthy water, all we need to do with the right language and placement is turn to the Constitution to enforce that right when it's been infringed upon. We need to be clear that we are creating an obligation on all government officials, ideally at every level of government, from the local town council to the state legislature to the governor's office and all the regulatory agencies in between. We need all government officials to be accountable to work to protect our environmental rights from the beginning of every step of decision-making that they are responsible for. And of tremendous value is to include generational language, to be clear that we are protecting rights for present and future generations. It is also very helpful to have language that identifies the state as the trustee of the natural resources of the state. Natural resources that must be protected for beneficiaries that include all people, including future generations. There's a lot of legal strength, power, and benefit that comes from trustee language when you are able to utilize it. For example, it brings forth fiduciary obligations that lawyers and judges clearly understand, the fiduciary obligation to protect the natural resources for the benefit of all people equitably. The fiduciary obligation to put the needs and the rights of the beneficiaries first versus the needs and the rights or goals of others like industry or political operators, right? These fiduciary duties offer strength and clarity when you're trying to ensure protection of natural resources. When we pass green amendments, when we fulfill these key fundamental criteria, along with some others, we really do create transformational change when it comes to environmental protection. We create transformational change both in the law and in terms of empowering people. So let's, with broad strokes, look at some of the changes that come into play. Again, this is broad strokes. We can't go down every rabbit hole, although certainly during Q&A, people want to talk hypotheticals, I'm all in. But I've said it several times, but this is really the most important thing, that environmental rights are lifted up so that they are given the same constitutional recognition and protection as those other fundamental rights we hold dear. We all know how powerfully the right to free speech, the right to freedom of religion, the right to bear arms are protected because they are protected in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. We all know when somebody claims and can demonstrate an infringement on these fundamental rights, how everybody in government, the elected officials, the lawyers, the judges, right? Even community members rally together to ensure that those fundamental rights are given their due, are given the protection that they're entitled to. Right now, we don't have that for the environment, but with constitutional green amendment protection, we get it. We get that most powerful recognition and protection. One of the things legally that the Bill of Rights placement particularly brings when we pass a constitutional green amendment, it means that when government is going to infringe on our environmental rights, like we all know that not every fundamental right is sacrosanct, that you can never infringe upon it, but there are limited circumstances when they can be infringed upon. So the same now applies for the environment, that if we have constitutional green amendments in our state constitution, then our government officials can only infringe on those fundamental rights when they can demonstrate that there's a compelling state interest, when they can demonstrate that the action that they're proposing to take is necessary to honor that compelling state interest, when they can demonstrate that they've done their best to minimize the infringement on the right. In the environmental context, that means prevention of pollution and degradation as a starting point, not hopping to the end where we're simply focused on accepting it and managing it through reviews and permits. This all pulled together necessarily reorients our government officials so that we are truly trying to prevent harm first. Again, not just hopping to the end of the process and managing it. When we have constitutional green amendments, we tremendously empower environmental justice, because now all people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomic status, their tribal membership status, their gender, their geography, all people have the same constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. And when we can demonstrate that there's been a disproportionate impacting, too much pollution and degradation consistently and disproportionately inflicted on communities of color, indigenous communities, low-income communities, time and time again, we then have a constitutional problem, right? Because we all have the same constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment. All government officials are constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably. So if not everybody's rights are being protected equitably, particularly because they are communities of color, they are low-income communities, they are indigenous communities, we can turn to the Constitution and say, we've got a problem that needs to be remedied. Really, truly, environmental sacrifice zones become immediately constitutionally suspect under this Green Amendment pathway. Generational justice is real. It's real, and it's not just for the children who are here today, but it's for the children that are yet to be born. When we say that we have to protect the environmental rights or the natural resources in our Green Amendment language for present and future generations, that is not just aspirational, pretty language. That is real, that is meaningful, that is substantive. And what we have demonstrated in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where we have that language, that is absolutely enforceable. It mandates that government officials, when they're taking their actions, must ensure that the harms that are being inflicted on the environment, or better yet, that the environment is being protected in a way that will properly serve those of us who are here today, but also properly serve those future generations yet to be born. They have to look through time. They have to consider cumulative impacts, right? And ensure that future generations have the same beneficial values of a healthy environment that those of us here today have. It truly is meaningful, it truly is substantive, and it truly is enforceable. What do constitutional green amendments do, right, is they don't wipe away the laws that we already have on the books. Often I hear that as a false allegation. That is silly. That is silly when lawyers in the opposition try to claim that. Any lawyers in the opposition out there, you're being silly if you say that. What we do is we actually we strengthen the laws that are already on the books, because now all of those existing laws have to be interpreted and applied with the strength necessary to ensure our government officials are honoring their obligation to protect our environmental rights, as articulated in the Bill of Rights section of our state constitution. Right now, legislators and regulators kind of have free rein on how they're going to interpret the language on the books. There's no overarching guiding light, guiding authority, guiding power, guiding obligation in the Constitution. With a constitutional green amendment, we're remedying that gap in the law. So now all of the existing laws have to be reinterpreted and applied in that more powerful way. Of course, we're creating a great foundation for those good government officials that want to do better, that want to do right by the environment. They can now rely upon their Green Amendment constitutional obligation as a primary platform for doing things better. And we can fill the gaps, right? We can all think about PFAS, that man-made family of chemicals that industry and the Department of Defense have used in devastating ways and used very cavalierly. So this man-made family of toxic chemicals has been allowed to just slither in the environment all over our nation, including into people's drinking water supplies. One of the reasons why PFAS was allowed to do that, one of the reasons why PFAS is harming so many people across our nation, is because of an absence of laws and regulations at the federal level, at the state level. There was nothing to grab onto for legislators, regulators, or the people to enforce
when we saw that there was a real problem happening. But if we had had a constitutional right to clean water in all of our state constitutionals at the time this was starting to emerge as a problem, when we could see that we had this new toxic chemical being used in these dangerous ways getting into the environment, we, the people, could have turned to our constitutional right to clean water, grab onto that, and secure good government action to protect us. And that is something I just want you to know. It's not in one of my examples, but that is something that we actually have done in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where Pennsylvania, like every other state, failed to put in place critical protections with regards to PFAS contamination. We at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, using our advocacy, using the law, turned to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and said, your failure to put in place drinking water protections from PFAS contamination is a violation of your constitutional obligation to protect the natural resources of the state and the environmental rights of present and future generations. And you know what? Ultimately, it took a while, but ultimately, the state of Pennsylvania agreed with us. And you started to see coming out of the governor and out of the regulators, the Department of Environmental Protection, you started to see steps taken. And every single time they took one of those steps, what did they cite? They cited Pennsylvania's Green Amendment as one of the reasons why they needed to do it. And so actually in Pennsylvania this year, we have some of the strongest PFAS drinking water regulations that have come out for two of the PFAS chemicals. Of course, constitutional green amendments are not about neighbor versus neighbor. Again, if you're one of those industry operatives that are going around saying, oh, this country is going to be suing the farmers and suing the industry, that's not true. And you know it's not true, and I know it's not true. Because constitutional green amendments are about a restraint on government action. It is about we, the people, saying to our government officials, as we say with all those other fundamental freedoms we hold dear, that we, through our Constitution, have given you permission to govern over us. But amongst the rules of the road are that when you govern, here are these fundamental human, inalienable, indefeasible, inherent rights that are ours, that we are telling you, you may not behave in a way that you infringe upon them. That's what we do for the right to free speech, freedom of religion. That is now what we are doing with environmental rights. It is actually a very conservative approach to constitutional interpretation and application, and that same conservative approach applies to environmental rights. It's powerful and it's important and it's clear, and all lawyers and judges understand it. But it's not about you suing the farmer upstream or you suing the industrial operator. It's about you identifying the government action that is allowing the harm or inaction, and then using the Green Amendment to address it. And of course, if people feel that there has been a violation of their constitutional rights to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, as with all other fundamental freedoms, people can get access to the courts to vindicate those rights. They don't have to find a statute that gives them permission to go to court to protect themselves. They can claim a constitutional violation as long as they can make their case. And yes, constitutional violations are a high hurdle, but as long as you believe that you can make that case, you can get into the court to do so. But it's not just about the law, although these legal changes, and there are more of them, are powerful and are important and truly are transformational when it comes to environmental protection. But it is also about transforming the groundwork, the foundation, the legal foundation, the environmental foundation, the environmental thinking of activists and advocates who are stepping up to advocate for environmental protection. If they're stepping up to protect the water or the air or the local forest or the wetlands or the critters, right? The critical ecosystems. As people are advocating for these things, they are not just advocating for the environments that they hold dear, the environments that they know are essential to sustaining their happy, healthy lives, but they are also advocating for a constitutional right. And this is just fundamentally different. They're advocating for a constitutional right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment that they are legally and constitutionally entitled to. That is powerful and that is important, and it is transformational in how people think about themselves as environmental activists. So often when people get up to advocate, they are dismissed with nasty name calling. And it is very easy for people who are new to activism particularly, or perhaps don't have the same kind of personality as somebody like me, to be name called into silence, to feel shamed, to feel like they're doing something wrong because their activism is being characterized or mischaracterized by their friends or their neighbors or the people up at the decision-making dais. But if they now add to this, that they are not just fighting for the environments that they love and that they hold dear and that they know they are entitled to, but they are fighting for a constitutional right, transformationally. That is just so empowering for a person to fight for your right to free speech, to fight for your right to a clean, safe, and healthy environment, because it's a constitutional right, changes the way you think about yourself, and it changes the way that you are viewed by everybody else around you. Now, the Green Amendment movement is a national movement. It's a national movement that's starting at the state level. When it comes to environmental protection, the states have tremendous power. So too does the federal government, but the states have a lot of power. And usually when the federal government is stepping in, they're sort of stepping, creating the floor, and the states can always do better. And then there are a lot of areas where the states just take on themselves, right? So when we seek and secure a constitutional Green Amendment at the state level, we are addressing a whole big universe of environmental protection that lies with the states. State constitutional amendments happen with regularity. They're actually quite accessible. Yes, it is a more difficult process than the legislative process. It's one of the things that makes the environmental rights protection more enduring, because it is a higher hurdle to secure it. It also means it's a higher hurdle to lose it. Once you have it, you're not, chances of anybody getting rid of it are, I would suggest, slim to none. But these amendments are accessible at the state level. So by focusing on the states first, we are giving us the ability to secure greater protections sooner, meaningful, powerful, important protections at the state level. But we will also need a federal Green Amendment. We know, though, that that's an even higher hurdle. And in order to get a federal Green Amendment, we have to have a vote of 3/4 of the states. And in order to get that vote and lay the foundation to have that happen, we have to go around our nation educating people, educating individuals and organizations and elected officials and policymakers as to why this is powerful and important. So why not do that work of educating community after community, official after official, by doing that work while seeking and securing state amendments, right? As we're going forth and building the foundation for a federal amendment, right? So we have to do the work anyway. We could just do the work for the federal amendment, but better strategy is to do the work state by state, educate, inform, engage, secure, prove the power of a Green Amendment by utilizing it. And as we do that, we are genuinely building that strong foundation we will need to ultimately get a federal amendment. And what I believe is going to happen is we're going state by state by state. There's going to be a moment we're going to see organically that we are at the right tipping point to add a federal Green Amendment to our state by state strategy. But we can't hop there first. We certainly can't hop there now. If we do so, we will lose, and we will suck all of the energy, all of the attention, and all of the philanthropic dollars out of the room, throwing it at a federal amendment we're not going to get, and as a result, we're not going to make change. But if we can take all of that energy and all of those philanthropic dollars and throw them at state by state amendments, we will be accomplishing tremendous protection in the near term, while also building the foundation for that critical long-term protection. And our Green Amendment movement is really taking hold. We got the Green Amendment in New York in 2021, a year ago, right? Pennsylvania and Montana have their own stories. I'm going to mention Pennsylvania's story just a little bit in a moment, but they each have their own stories. They've been around a little bit longer. In New York, through our Green Amendment movement, we got a Green Amendment movement in 2021 with over 70% of the vote. That's not all Democratic voters. That's all people, because this is not a partisan issue. This is a people issue. But we also have about 15 states that are engaged in our Green Amendment movement. We have, I think, 10 or 11 states where there's proposed language, and then those are the light green. And then we have other states where we're working towards proposed language, that's even lighter green. And then we have other states where the grassroots activism or activists have started to reach out, or elected officials have started to reach out, and I'm having conversations with them about how to get the movement started in their state. But that's a lot for a very young national movement. It's taking hold, and it's taking hold powerfully because people can see the power of this pathway for protection. Now, just before I close, I just want to really answer the question that everybody always asks is, does it really make a difference, Maya? I mean, it all sounds very nice, and I'm with you in my heart. I have a right to clean water and clean air, but to saying it in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, using those Green Amendment criteria, does that really make a difference? It does make a difference. And I'm just going to give you a few examples, but there are many more out there. I think one of the most important examples to me is our Pennsylvania example, because this is the foundation upon which I founded this National Green Amendment pathway and movement. It's the reason why I wrote the book. In the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, since about the mid-2000s, fracking had come to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, fracking for gas from shale, a very destructive industrial operation. It was contaminating the waterways, the natural waterways of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It was contaminating people's drinking water supplies. It was spewing pollution into the air, including climate changing methane emissions. It was resulting in the decimation of forests and wetlands and ecosystems of all kinds. It was subjecting communities and families to 24/7 noise, light, and pollution throughout their communities. And it was really having devastating consequences. But in about 2012, the industry really wanted to find a way to actually make it even easier for themselves so that they could proliferate more easily and more robustly throughout the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And so leaders from the industry actually went behind closed doors and they wrote for themselves a piece of legislation. The fracking leaders, the frackers did this. Wrote for themselves a piece of legislation that they turned over to the Pennsylvania legislature, who then passed the legislation in 2012, and the legislation was signed by the governor. This legislation was literally a gift basket to the industry, and of course it was because they wrote it. And it did a lot of bad things, but just by way of example, 3 of the things it did. It put in place automatic waivers from environmental protection standards that would apply to every other industry in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It alleviated the frackers of the obligation to notify families and communities that were on private drinking water wells that their drinking water had become potentially contaminated by toxic fracking chemicals from nearby operations. It preempted local zoning authority and mandated that communities allow drilling and fracking operations in every part of every community in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. No longer could town councils say, listen, you're a highly polluting industrial operation. If you're coming into our town, you can only do it over there where all of the other highly polluting industrial operations operate. You can't go into the heart of our agricultural communities and our residential communities, our historic and environmental protection zones. No, no, no. With Act 13, fracking had to be allowed to happen in those residential communities, in those agricultural zones, in those historic and environmental protection zones. In fact, by virtue of Act 13, drilling and operating fracking well pads had to be allowed as close as 300 feet, less than a football field, from people's homes, from their schools, from their, right in the heart of their residential communities. These highly polluting industrial fracking operations had to be allowed to take place and take hold, and the town council members could not do anything about it. At the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we have been fighting fracking for a long time, and that's another story that I'm not going to tell you. But when Act 13 had been passed, because Pennsylvania is one of my 4 watershed states, we knew that we had to take this law on. The problem is, how do you take on a law that's passed by your legislature and signed by your governor, right? You could protest, say, repeal it, change it, don't do it. That wasn't going to happen, of course. They had just passed this law, and it was, they were all buddies with the frackers. You can try to elect better people to office who will repeal it down the line, but that's too late. You can sit down and shut up and let it happen. We weren't going to do that at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network. We had to find a way to take it on legally. And we
Oh, that's aside. Anyway, the point there is that if Act 13 had gone into play, things would have gotten exponentially worse, even though they were already bad. So we decided, I in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper and my organization decided that we were going to challenge Act 13 legally. But how do you do that? And by the way, there were 7 municipalities that also wanted to join us. They were very pissed off that their local zoning authority had been stripped from them and had been preempted. Well, we at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network recognize that actually in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution, we did actually have a constitutional right of all the people to pure water, clean air, and healthy environments, and that there was a constitutional trustee obligation on every government official to protect the natural resources of the state for present and future generations. So we were going to grab hold of this long ignored constitutional environmental rights amendment, and we were going to use it to challenge Act 13. And you might be saying to yourself, well, gosh, Maya, how come you didn't use that amendment to prevent Act 13 in the first place, to prevent fracking from coming in the first place? Well, if that already existed in the Constitution. Well, the problem is that while this very powerful, beautiful language was in fact in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution and had been added to the Constitution actually in 1971, at that point it was over 40 years before, there were some really stupid lawsuits that were brought that were misusing this language in ways that trying to challenge things that they just had no business using this environmental rights amendment to challenge these bad things. Let's put it that way. And so long story short, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, almost as soon as this amendment was added to the Constitution, declared it to be just a statement of policy. Again, good advice. You can take it or you can leave it, and the Pennsylvania legislators left it. In fact, the Chief Justice at the time, with one of the seminal cases undermining the Pennsylvania Green Amendment, Article 1, Section 27, the Chief Justice wrote a dissent, and he actually characterized one of these majority opinions as disemboweling the Pennsylvania Environmental Rights Amendment. Very powerful language that they so decimated its strength and its power. Anyway, that's how things stood between 1971 and 2012 when this Act 13 law was passed, right? 42 years of bad precedent. But we felt like this Act 13 was such an egregious overreach by the industry and their buddies in the legislature that maybe we could overturn that 42 years of bad precedent. And so we brought a challenge saying that Act 13 violated Article 1, Section 27 of the Pennsylvania Constitution and the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. The case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, very conservative Supreme Court, led by a very conservative Chief Justice. And in December 2013, we got an amazing victory out of that Chief Justice. The opinion was actually written by Chief Justice Ronald Castile. And I just want you to read with me a few of the things that he wrote in that December opinion. He said that by any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation, the shales they were fracking in, will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that were being harmed were resources essential to life, to health, and to liberty, and that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging violated the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so in that moment, with that victory, can't see the words, we defeated some of the most devastating provisions of Act 13, stopped them from ever going into effect before they could wreak their devastating harm. But at the same time, we breathed legal life into that long ignored Pennsylvania Environmental Rights Amendment and restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. It was really powerful. And it was in the wake of that victory, as we were going forth doing our work, utilizing this newly enlivened, it's almost as if the Pennsylvania Green Amendment was just passed in December of 2013. And as we were going forth doing that work, that's sort of when I had my Green Amendment epiphany. And I thought to myself, my God, we have to have this in every single state across our nation. And I looked at every single state constitution across our nation, and I found that there was only one other state at that time, Montana, that had a similar provision. And I vowed to change that. And that's when I started the Green Amendment movement.
Since that Act 13 victory, we have had other decisions in the fracking context that have embraced and strengthened that original opinion. And I want you to know that, remember, I was a nonprofit using the Green Amendment to challenge Act 13, but we had 7 municipalities, 7 local governments that were also relying on the Green Amendment to protect their authority. But the amendment has been used in many other powerful ways in Pennsylvania and in Montana. A local town council faced with a development project that was going to result in the devastation of an old growth beech tree forest in a quickly urbanizing town. This was the last piece of precious open space. The community came out year after year and said, you must protect the natural resources of our community. You have a constitutional obligation. And the town council ultimately, when they rendered their decision, agreed. And they rejected the development project, citing their constitutional duty to protect the natural resources of their community for present and future generations. We had a community, the General Warren Village community, and in that community is a family, the Stauffer family, and they all lived next to a toxic site that had been in a toxic condition for over 30 years with a spreading pollution plume. This site is literally super saturated with TCE and other contaminants. The Department of Environmental Protection, despite knowing about this super saturated condition for 30 years, was doing nothing to get it cleaned up. There were known responsible parties, laws that required them to secure the cleanup from these responsible parties that had and have gobs and gobs and gobs of money. Johnson Matthey Corporation and Whitaker Corporation. Johnson Matthey Corporation and Whitaker Corporation. If you're out there, listen, make it right. And but rather than hold them accountable, the Department of Environmental Protection was negotiating a sweetheart deal with the developer, allowing them to develop the site with over 200 residential homes while it remained in its toxic condition. We now had a Green Amendment. We used our Green Amendment through our advocacy and through our litigation and said, you cannot advance that development project and you must get this site cleaned up. What's happening right now? That development project is not advancing. And the Department of Environmental Protection is prioritizing holding those responsible parties to clean up the site, enforcing the laws on the books that they had ignored all those years. In the state of Montana, the Green Amendment has been used to challenge irresponsible permits that were allowing industrial gold mining operations to take place in highly sensitive environmental locations important to communities. Because of the Green Amendment, those permits were rescinded, were voided. And in the state of New York, we just got our first Green Amendment decision last month, where communities who have been struggling to get help to get protection from a nearby landfill with spewing air emissions and had been ignored by the state for years and years and years, they are now utilizing the Green Amendment to get critical protections. And when the state tried to tell the court that the Green Amendment changes nothing, you should dismiss their case, the court said absolutely not. The Green Amendment means a lot. And this case gets to move forward. And so it's not the final decision, but it's the first decision and it's powerful. Now here in the state of Florida, we have a Green Amendment advancing. We, the community, has a Green Amendment advancing. It's called the Florida Right to Clean Water. This is a community effort being led by community residents, right? They're the ones writing it. They're the ones pressing it. They're the ones that are making it happen. And they're doing it the right way. They're doing it the right way. There's every state where a Green Amendment is advancing, the language and the strategy is different, depending on the unique personalities of that state and their legal requirements. We have really super smart activists and lawyers here in the state of Florida that are making sure that we're doing it the right way in Florida. And I'm not going to talk about that right way because they're going to talk about that right way. But know that it's the Florida Right to CleanWater.org. That's where you can get more information. And it's all about creating a fundamental right to clean and healthy waters in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution. People who want to learn more should go to floridacleanwater.org, sign up for the newsletter, learn how you can get engaged. The community needs your help. We have a new app that you can get on your computer, or you can go into the App Store and get on your phone, and you can join the Florida Green Amendment community and become an active, engaged partner in advancing this effort. Or, of course, you can get the book, The Green Amendment, and you can learn more and you can share it. And that's another pathway. And if you do get the book, every penny goes to the Green Amendment movement. No money goes to Maya. It's about saving the world, not making money for my pocket. And there you go. Okay.
Thank you so much, Maya. I'm just going to talk for a little bit, keeping this graphic up so that people have enough time to get the code or go to the website. So I will just talk into the void for just a moment so people have a few more minutes to look at that. Thank you so much for that incredible presentation. We are going to shift gears a little bit now and bring up our panelists to talk about how all of these concepts apply in Florida, what work's already been done and what work we are hoping to accomplish in the future. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We are also going to be asking Maya questions as well, but we have a few questions for our panelists as well. If you want to come sit at this table, we have some water, and that's where the camera's kind of set up, but it is however you are comfortable speaking to the masses. So first on our panel is Professor Jason Buhai. He is an associate professor at the Barry University School of Law, where he instructs courses in constitutional law, election law, and law and religion, and freedom and assembly. He holds his JD from Pennsylvania State University and a PhD in constitutional law from the University of Hong Kong. His scholarship focuses on constitutional history, comparative constitutionalism, voting rights, freedom of assembly, and the protection of regional autonomy. So we can see how he'll have a lot to share on the topics we've been talking about so far. Next, we have Judith Coons. She is a professor emerita of law. She is a retired professor with a lifelong commitment to social and ecological justice. After practicing law for a number of years, Professor Coons attended Harvard Divinity School, where the sacred loomed large and embraced all of the natural world. She was able to bring these commitments into teaching at Barry University School of Law, where she became a leading contributor in the field of earth jurisprudence and chaired the environmental and earth law programs. And she has contributed significantly to the academic and practical discourses in these emerging areas. And finally, we have Melissa Martin. She is a Florida native and a graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and has served as a commissioned U.S. Marine Corps officer, retiring as a staff judge advocate in 2014. She earned her law degree from Barry University School of Law. As you can see, we like to keep things in the family here. And active in matters of good governance, clean water advocacy, and conservation. In 2016, Mel helped to defeat a pro-fracking bill in Florida and led a county-wide coalition which successfully helped pass a half-cent sales tax to support necessary restoration products for the Indian River Lagoon. She has also served as an adjunct professor of law here at Barry, teaching water pollution law and environmental ethics. She currently lives in Eugene, Oregon, and volunteers in support of the Florida Right to Clean Water Citizens Initiative as a campaign coordinator. So please help me welcome our panel who will be joining Maya. Okay, and so this is the first question is, would everyone like to take a few minutes to introduce themselves, or would you like me to lead the discussion with the questions? Okay, we will do that then. Okay, so to start with, I would like to ask Mel and Maya, why does Florida need a green amendment to kind of kick us off?
Well, it's pretty much what Maya said. Florida, Can the folks on Zoom hear this?
If you keep talking.
I'll be
and-
projecting my voice into this mic, but I'm not sure about.
Okay, can everyone hear Mel speaking?
La da da.
I'm getting hands.
Okay. All right, so the bottom line is that for the exact reasons that Maya had detailed, there's a lot of great, robust environmental laws that are supposed to protect a lot of our issues in the environmental sense. It's from waters to ecosystems, et cetera. So it's not for the lack of good laws on the books. And we have wonderful people in all of our regulatory agencies doing their best to do what they can to do their job in environmental protection. But unfortunately, there are kinks and disjointed nodes of the system that allows too much interpretation power within the regulatory system that is unfortunately influenced by various agendas, shall we say, that are just inappropriate. So it doesn't always go to the public interest like it should, or the public interest is not considered to a sufficient legal degree. And so definitions like harm or health, things like that, are unfortunately degraded within the agency realm, and there's nothing to say we can't do that. So this will say you can't do that. So that's the bottom line introduction to why we needed something in the Constitution to help us have a legal stopgap of, wait a second, you're not doing this right. And just to mention that there are causes of action dispersed in statutory law that allows us to hold polluters accountable to a degree, but if that pollution is permitted, the threshold to question decision is much higher, much tougher to get through. So this is a clear-cut, very stable and understandable way of everyone in Florida from the ground up and the top down to understand what our priorities are. We prefer that our public interest in a healthy environment, clean and healthy waters is more important than the pollution, the rights to pollute.
Maya, did you have any additions?
I mean, I think I said it all. The only thing I would say is, for my part, is if you don't think anything more is needed, then go do some Google searching.
Yes.
And you could search for pollution, water, manatees here in the state of Florida, and you will see there's plenty of harm and plenty of people being sacrificed. And so we need something more.
Yeah, one of the topics that was woven all throughout your presentation and about how green amendments can have an effect is the concept of environmental justice. So if we're looking, if we're switching gears to looking specifically at Florida now, how do we see, that intersection between green amendments and environmental justice taking root here and addressing the specific problems? And that's for either Mel or Maya or anyone on the panel.
I mean, I feel like I spoke a lot.
So it's copy and paste to any of our issues that are affecting the communities of the lower income, or just not resourced to pay environmental lawyers to fight a losing battle in court. So a lot of times decisions are made to locate certain like industrial type facilities that are known to create environmental hazards in places where the local communities can't fight it. So in that sense, just name the issue. There's probably a lot south of Okeechobee area that probably people that live down close to I don't want to say corporate names, but mining industry type activities that are harming their local waters and things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of interesting and sad examples that are going on, and lots of issues that need to be addressed this way.
Let's get really, really clear about this. I mean, we are on really close to Lake Apopka. And a lot of you know about the horrendous circumstances that took place in Lake Apopka, where the farm workers were made to walk and work in chemical muck for, 14 hours a day, and developed all of these horrible health effects. And they have sued this and tried this and done that, and there is no remedy. There's no remedy. And we're going to talk about one of the reasons that there's no remedy is that there are so many people and entities polluting Lake Apopka. There's no one responsible party. No one's responsible. If everyone's responsible, the way that the law is in the state of Florida right now, no one is responsible. Okay, so that's just one example. And so many of you all with the Right to Clean Water movement now know about the manatees, know about, what Nestle is doing to the water, know what some of the, the factory farms are doing to our waters. So, and it's all because it is permitted. There's a threshold of harm that is permitted. That's the whole thing. Run the government around what is permissible and give them permits to harm, because this is supposedly a safe level. Well, okay, it's not. But then you get other groups also permitted to harm, and so you have permit upon permit upon permit, and you have an aggregate. It's the cut by 1,000 slices. The massacring of people in our environment. And I'm sure some of you, the Indian River Lagoon and the algae blooms, the fish kills, the manatees, gosh, our poor manatees dying because of the seagrass, and so forth and so on. This is why we need a green amendment in the state of Florida.
Just from the environmental justice perspective, it's just to offer that clarity that when we add this amendment to the Bill of Rights, just to reemphasize what I said, is that all people will now have the same constitutional rights. And the government officials identified in the proposed amendment will be constitutionally bound to ensure the environmental rights of all people are protected. And so if you have a community of color, if you have a low-income community that is being so overwhelmed by pollution and degradation, right, that their kids are getting cancer or can't learn when they're in school because of the impacts of what they are ingesting in their drinking water that's emanating from the environment, from environmental pollution and contamination, that existence of that community being so exposed to pollution and degradation that it is harming every aspect of their lives or their health creates a constitutional problem, because clearly their rights are not being protected. So in and of itself, they can now turn to their constitutional right, that community, to get help. But the other added element when you have environmental racism is if you have this community of color that is being sacrificed consistently and over time, and then over here you have that more affluent, richer, whiter community that's not, right? And you've got this incredible disparity. That adds another element, because you are no longer protecting, or government officials are not protecting the rights of all people equitably. They are truly sacrificing one in order to protect everybody else. That as well becomes an additional constitutional problem, right? So we now have layers of argument that can be brought to bear. And I just want you to know, in the American Bar Association, a colleague of mine, Casey Manahan, and me, Maya Van Rossum, we wrote a piece exactly about how green amendments help with environmental justice. So you can find that on the resources page of the website, but it's a really robust piece. And I think you'll find a lot of help for here in the state of Florida. But the other thing is you don't have to show racial intent. So many times when you're talking about racial inequity, you have to show racial intent. You don't have to show racial intent because we all have that same right? And so the disproportionate impacting is a problem. The fact that this community has lost its environmental rights is a problem. The racial intent is just, frankly, a sad fact of government and life here in the United States of America, in every state, Florida and nationwide, also systemically in the environmental field. So just emphasizing those pieces of it in the environmental justice context.
Thank you very much for that. So I want to take a look at one of the efforts that has happened here in Florida. Another great point that Maya has made is that, this hasn't just come out of nowhere, right? These things have been developing over time. And so Florida specifically, during the last, what we call the Constitutional Revision Commission, and I'm just going to kind of gloss over this because we're going to dive a little deeper into it in a minute. There was a proposed provision, and I want to just go through the language of that with you now, because another thing we've learned today is how important word choice and language in these sorts of provisions are. So I'm just going to read through it and then follow up with a few questions. So what was proposed was the following. The natural resources of the state are the legacy of present and future generations. Every person has a right to a clean and healthful environment, including clean air and water, control of pollution, and the conservation and restoration of the natural, scenic, historic, and aesthetic value of the environment as provided by law. Any person may enforce this right against any party, public or private, subject to reasonable limitations as provided by law. So the Environmental and Earth Law program here at Berry was fortunate enough to work directly with developing the language in the proposal, both through the Center for Earth Jurisprudence in their community efforts and directly with work from the Environmental and Earth Law Clinic that we have here. And they did that work on behalf of the League of Women Voters. So of course, I'm just going to take this moment to carve out a little time and, plug our program here. But we have these varieties of ways in which our law students can engage with exactly this type of legal work. We think that that's very important, not just understanding the academic or the theoretical side of things, but the practical applications as well. And so what I wanted to ask our panel is, for those of us not in law school, for those of us who want to engage with the process, what is the process of trying to get a constitutional amendment change? And this would be more for either Jason or Judy. Start with Jason.
Oh, thank you. Florida has 5 ways to amend the Constitution, which is more than any other state in the Union, which probably accounts for why we have so many constitutional amendments overall. The most difficult way would be to call a constitutional convention, have our Philadelphia moment, write a whole new thing. That happened in the 1960s, not since. The most common ways are to have something go through the legislature proposes it themselves, or to go through, as Margaret suggested, the Constitutional Revision Commission, which is a group of 20, it comes together every 20 years. Some people are appointed by elected officials, some people are automatically there by virtue of their office ex officio, and they come together and give you a kind of establishment perspective on things that should go into the Constitution. And that's a very popular way to have things change. The most popular method in the sense of direct democracy would be what's called the Citizens Ballot Initiative. So Florida is one of 18 states that let you go out there and pound the pavement and have a petition and come up with your own language and bypass the whole establishment structure of the state, bypass all the lobbyists, go directly to the people, right? So since this became functional in the 1970s, there have been about 35 more or less successful citizens ballot initiatives. There are a lot of hoops to jump through, more than any other way to do it. You got to create your committee just for the purpose of creating your amendment proposal. You register that with the Secretary of State and you deliver them a copy of your proposed amendment. Then you go out and you pound the pavement, and there are certain threshold numbers that you have to meet. You have to get, technically speaking, 8% of the total number of people that voted in the previous presidential election to support your proposal. And if you meet that, then other gears get set in motion. So it's not the total number of registered voters. You have to Google how many people voted in the last presidential election. So I did that while I was listening over here. And that would be 11.1 million people if you're looking toward the next election cycle. There's 14 million registered voters, and about 3/4 of them voted in 2020. So 11.1 million. 8% of that would be 888,000. So that's your goal. That's your threshold number. And those 888,000 have to come from among half of Florida's congressional districts. So they have to come from at least 14 of the 28 Florida US House of Representative districts that there are. Signatures are only valid for 2 years. If you successfully complete all of those hurdles, there's one more major hurdle waiting for you, and that is the Florida Supreme Court. Somehow the legislature of Florida convinced you, the people of Florida, in 1986 to allow a threshold judicial review of any proposed citizens ballot initiative. This doesn't go for anything that comes out of the establishment. It goes for what comes from the people. And they're going to have the first bite at the apple. They're going to give it a thumbs up or thumbs down. Ostensibly, they're not supposed to look at the substance, although we can talk about how that actually comes out in practice. Ostensibly, they're supposed to be looking at procedural things. Does your title, does your ballot summary have so many words, 15 for the title, 75 for your ballot summary? And does it not combine multiple issues together, something called log rolling, and there's good reasons for that, actually. Although we'll talk about the way it's been used, I'm sure, to substantively frustrate certain ballot proposals. You can't fundamentally alter the form of government of the state of Florida, and you can't cause tremendous confusion between different parts of the Constitution, are some of the rules that have come down either in the text or Florida Supreme Court decisions since then interpreting those provisions.
That's great. Let me just add some footnotes here. Okay, the Department of State has a wonderful handout, a manual for how to do this. And they tell you exactly how a political committee would move this through the various steps. And you are so close. They say that you need, okay, for Supreme Court review, okay, that's less than the 900,000. You need 222,898 signatures to get to Supreme Court review. Let me say that again. You need 222,000, what did I say? 898 signatures just to get to Supreme Court review. Now, in order to do that, you've got to have half of the congressional districts at least, and the signatures have to be verified by the supervisors of election of those counties, all of which have a fee for verifying those signatures. And if you look at the little chart in the Secretary of State's manual, you'll see that they range from 10 cents per signature to $1 or 90 cents a signature. So let's take an average of 50 cents, just an average. We will need $125,000 just for signature verification at the first step. Okay? So we need to, there are petitions in the back and right there, and Jim has them in the back, and donations would be greatly appreciated. Of course, and then, you know, if they're all verified, so we're gonna need like 250,000 signatures, right? If they're all verified, then, and it passes Supreme Court review, then we'll need the 891,589 signatures from at least half of the congressional districts. And this all needs to be done by February of 2024. There's a hand in the back.
Will there be a charge to verify that?
Yes, absolutely. So we're talking about $500,000. We are talking about $500,000 to verify the signatures.
Now, all hope isn't lost because 4 environmental provisions in the Constitution were passed by Citizens Ballot Initiative, the Everglades Trust Fund, the limits on marine net fishing, the cruel and unusual confinement of pregnant pigs, and the Land Acquisition Trust are 4 of 8 environmental provisions that are not in the Bill of Rights, that are more, you know, ticky-tacky provisions of the Constitution and more in the miscellany. But it is going to be a tremendous expense.
Right.
Yeah, no.
So I just wanted to add the magical document called the Affidavit of Undue Burden, which means, yes, that's an undue burden. This is a grassroots movement. We're asking our volunteers to do this for for one of the main strategic reasons is we do owe all that money at the time of asking the supervisor of elections office to verify it. We do owe that money at the submission point. But if we file an affidavit of undue burden saying, we're just going to this is going to be a volunteer-based operation, then we don't have to pay, those fees are waived. So that's just to let everyone know, that's what we're doing right now. If and whenever we get these, the $10 to $15 million windfall, and we decide as a group, okay, maybe now would be a good time to pay petitioners. If that day comes, then we do have to back pay all of the verification fees. So that's an added cost to what we're going to have to pay in the future. So that may or may not happen. If $10 or $15 million drops in our laps for this very critical moment in Florida history, awesome. That will help assure us to get it done this year versus maybe the next round. However, we do have a solid and growing infrastructure of wonderful volunteers right now that are getting the word out. And this tour in and of itself is helping to energize lots of communities throughout Florida that, we own this, and Floridians are realizing this is a me thing. This is not a wait till someone else does it thing. So lots of people are getting that realization of not only this is going to work, this is actually going to do what needs to be done in our state, not just for me and my family, but for future Floridians. Then that for some reason, there's an impetus there that just gets them out the door or gets them on the phone or on the computer, say, how can I help? And that is exactly what's necessary for us to get this done without the $10 to $15 million. I mean, we do need signs. But I'm just saying it's definitely achievable.
Yeah.
And my point is that everybody in this room, and thank God for each one of you, is instrumental. It's not letting somebody else do it. With those kind of thresholds that we're going to have to meet, even if we do get the affidavits of undue burden, if we get the waivers, there is a lot to be done. Now, you also talked about the test, the Supreme Court test. Are we ready to go into that?
I'm ready if you are.
That was my next question.
Oh,
So
okay. You want to ask a question?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say you had mentioned, the single subject rule. And so I was curious if you could first elaborate a little more on what that is for people. And then also what issues we might see, as that pertains to these green amendments and how the Supreme Court has treated it in the past. So,
Well,
here, Jason.
okay, do you want to do the general and I'll do the specific?
Sure, yeah, we have a good
And
system
then
here.
Mel will hop in and.
Okay, the Florida Supreme Court is going to look for, again, procedural aspects, number of words in the title and the summary. They're also going to look for substance. And one of the main things they're going to look for substantively is this so-called single subject rule. That comes directly from the constitutional text, where it says you can amend the Constitution by ballot initiative. It says the text of your amendment shall embrace but one subject and matter directly connected therewith. And the major ruling on this case came in 1984. And the Florida Supreme Court there broke it down into what they were looking for that test. And they said, first of all, no log rolling, as we would say in Florida. You can't combine apples and oranges and broccoli and meats. You have to just be very, very specific. There has to be a natural oneness of purpose. Later case law has come to define this. It sounds very Zen, right? Now, there's good things about that. There's good things about preventing pork barrel spending and trying to jam through something that's unpopular with something that's popular, which has happened frequently in this state. But it has been used rather unpredictably to call things that appear to be coagulated together one subject, and things that appear to be one subject to actually be split apart. Whenever you open the door a little bit to substantive evaluation, there's always going to be that unpredictability there. You can't fundamentally limit or alter the functions of government. And again, no confusion between provisions. So when I teach my students Florida constitutional law, I give them a couple of examples. I give them a case where the Florida Supreme Court was considering a 3-strike violent offender felony conviction act. And cobbled in there was changing the definition of burglary on the railroad. And the Supreme Court of Florida said, even though these two things are together, that's all fine because it's all criminal law. So we can see that. And on the other hand, we contrast that with a case where it was, if you get 4 DUIs, you're going to lose your driver's license. And they cobbled that together with a provision about assigning bad checks to a debt collector. And there the Supreme Court said, no, these are two different things. There's no natural oneness of purpose here. Okay, so at that level, it's conceptually simple, but it gets confusing in a lot of cases that came down since. Back in the days when we used to debate defensive marriage acts, there was a key opinion that kind of blew minds where things seemed to be separate, but the Supreme Court said, no, it can all go. There's even been that original case back in 1984 was about government revenues and how you spend government revenues between taxes and bonds and things. And the Supreme Court said, no, even though it's all government revenue, these are all specific streams of revenue and therefore they're all separate. So my long-winded point here is that sometimes it works the way you think it'll work, and sometimes it doesn't work the way that you think it would work. And I would like to follow up on that with the other thing that I've mentioned, because I think it might come in here as far as the ballot and title summaries, but I'd like to reserve that.
Okay, we're going to just talk about the single subject requirement. And this is just for citizens initiatives.
Mhm.
There are 5 ways to amend the Constitution. Just for citizens initiatives, it has to be limited to a single subject. And part of the way that the Supreme Court has interpreted it is that there is, it can't have a substantial effect can't substantially alter the functions of multiple branches of government or levels of government. Okay? And what does that mean? They have taken that phrase to use it to invalidate what they consider to be dangerous amendments. And so there's this wonderful law review article by Thomas Rutherford called "The People Drunk or the People Sober?" That does a review of all of the citizens' initiatives that have been reviewed under this particular standard of whether it substantially alters the functions of multiple branches or levels of government. And there were, out of 41 initiatives that they reviewed, they struck 37%. And all of them were viewed as suspect to the Supreme Court in some way. So the Supreme Court views itself as the gatekeeper for making sure that that there's not something unduly disruptive. And Rutherford said that traced this all the way back to the origins of the case law and said that it is intellectually suspect. Where did this come from? You know, and the way it's been applied, you know, is also suspect. So Mel and I, the reason that this is drafted the way it is has a lot to do with the single subject requirement. There are many other things that folks wanted to be in here, and that I wanted to be in here, and Mel wanted to be in here, and Jim wanted to be in here, and rights of nature, and you know, and Maya would like to be in here, but we can't have it in here. So we narrowed this to one thing: a fundamental right to a clean and healthy environment, and the only defendant would be state executive agencies. Boom. And so we just turned it as lean as we could to focus on that so that we have a chance of overcoming the threshold that the Supreme Court is going to lay before us. Mel, did you want to say anything more? Jason, you wanted to say something more?
I think just like in my mind, the one word has just been flashing in the forefront, and that is inconsistency. One of the main have-to-dos in the very beginning of this whole evolution of drafting and constructing it together was that we wanted to delve into the body of law that is relevant. And pretty much everything was relevant, but it did seem like, I think we mentioned before, it seemed like an ongoing bar exam for months where every word and every phrase and every provision could trigger something. And the way that the Florida Supreme Court had treated each case through the years, in a word, has been inconsistent. So how do you approach that problem set when you're drafting a citizen's initiative that you want to survive Supreme Court review? You go for the lowest common denominator approach. You make sure that everything that they have ever said or used to throw out an initiative has been accounted for. So, so that's what we did. And I just wanted to have another footnote. It was interesting. Florida is alone in this. Every other state in the union knows what single subject means. And they haven't used this process as a subterfuge to gatekeep what they want and what they don't want subjectively. Okay, it seems like that Florida is a special case, which is why our Green Amendment is 2 pages long and not beautiful, succinct, 1 or 2 sentences long. So that is why. And I just wanted to go on the record and say thank you from the very, very bottom of my heart to Professor Coons that she spent at least hundreds of hours, pro bono, of course, and usually between the hours of midnight and 03, with me going through every single argument or potential argument that every word held. So thank you very much.
If I could follow up, I think all this indeterminacy and all this unpredictability perhaps stems from one thing we all are aware of, which is that our court, our Florida Supreme Court, is more political than other courts in the sense that our Supreme Court justices don't have life tenure or even 20-year or 10-year tenure. Our Supreme Court justices have 6-year tenure, and those terms are renewable based on the governor nomination and then, the Florida Senate approval process. When you are only getting a 6-year term, that can create rapid shifts on the composition of the court. It can quickly go from liberal to conservative in a 10-year period, rather than generationally with the US Supreme Court. And you tend to play for your team because 6 years later, you're hoping when that governor or the next governor comes, you're going to get renewed for your patronage for the platform type of thing. So that probably adds to the unpredictability, arguably predictability, if you want to read the tea leaves, but jurisprudentially, the unpredictable jurisprudence. And if I could say one more thing to be aware of here, it was not exactly the single subject rule. It was more the title and ballot summary. And something I've been keeping my eye on, which I think can be analogized here and might give us an indication of this present Florida Supreme Court and the way they analyze things, is the recreational use of cannabis amendment attempts that have been going on for a very, very long time in this state. And all kinds of gatekeeping ways are used to frustrate. During COVID, it was number of signatures, those signatures becoming invalid. In 2021, there was a review by the Florida Supreme Court. And the amendment, which was styled, regulate marijuana in a manner similar to alcohol to establish age, licensing, and other restrictions, was its title. Okay, so it meets the 15 words, and then there was a summary that met 75 words. They held the summary to be affirmatively misleading. Now, this bill was 15 pages long printed out. This was a heavy, this wasn't a 1 or 2 liner. This was like a Marcy's Law or to some extent like the way Florida's fashioning its Green Amendment, to be quite comprehensive, to say exactly what it wants and not kind of leave it to chance or to have it be clipped at the legs later, pruned like in some other states they have been when you leave the language too broad. So despite this thing being 15 pages long and very, very comprehensive, it came down to one word. Like Mel said, every word. They looked at the summary and they said in the 75-word summary, they focused on the word use. And the phrase they used in the summary was limited use, limiting use. And the Florida Supreme Court struck it down. They struck the whole ballot down. They said there's nothing in here about personal use, limiting it to personal use in your ballot summary, even though the rest of your amendment talks about personal use and not like, friends selling to friends or small communities type of things. Because you didn't put that in your summary, you used limited instead of personal, we're striking down the whole amendment. The impact of that is try again in 2 years. Start the whole process again. Because probably the greatest criticism of this process and the review of it is if you get struck down, you get struck down. You have to start de novo. There's no period to cure or change a word. You don't get to suggest alternate language before the court. It's got to be watertight. Combine that with the political dimension, and it is extraordinarily difficult.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Oh my gosh. So you see, every word of that ballot summary has been scrutinized. We wrote that thing hundreds of times, mostly at dark 30. Yes. To make sure that we didn't have a use problem. Now, so Thomas Rutherford, our friend, People Drunk, People Sober, did the review on the ballot title and summary and said that, as Jason has predicted, 45% of those reviewed were struck down on ballot title and summary grounds. You have to have clear and unambiguous language and it cannot mislead. So they can pick out one word and in the title, in the summary, and say that it is not clear, it is ambiguous, and it misleads. I do need to say that in Florida, the Supreme Court justices do have terms until there's mandatory retirement at the age of 70 or 75. I think they just changed it to 75. So there is considerable leeway, and the folks who have been appointed to the Supreme Court are young, very young, and perhaps not amenable to this kind of amendment, and so may find some grounds to strike it. But believe me, we have done everything that we know to do to guard against that. So so onward.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So time really flies when you're having fun, and we are actually coming down into our last half hour. So what I'd like to do is just sort of lay out a bit of an agenda going forward of what we want to hit based on the questions that are coming in. So I want to make sure we're addressing everyone's questions. So first, I'm going to ask us to get into some of the specific provisions. We've talked about how much the language was labored over in this proposal. So if we can talk a little bit more specifically about what's in there, and I can actually put the language up on the screen for everyone to see while we do that. We've had some questions there. And then after we get a better understanding of what's in the Florida proposal, we've had quite a few questions about the focus on water. And so I'd like to open up the panel to talk about that a little bit as well. And then we have many people who are already volunteering their time and efforts and want to know all the specifics about how many petitions we have, what do we need, how do we go about it, what needs to be done. So I'd love us to end with that so that everybody's walking away knowing what we can do here. So to start with, I'm going to put the language up, and yeah, if Mel and Judy, if you wouldn't mind kind of walking us through what those provisions are in the proposed language, and then one of the pushbacks that we continually get when we're putting any type of environmental protections or just any changes, especially when we're dealing with anything rights-based, is, you know, the threat of litigation, the threat of that pushback. So if we could talk a little bit about, you know, what remedies are incorporated into that proposal, but then also, you know, what the potential for litigation is and if the proposal has accounted for that in any way. So big question, but I will pass it over to you to get into that more specifically.
Can you put the language?
Yep, doing it right now.
I haven't taught a law school class in 3 years, so bear with me. How many law students here? How many lawyers here? All right. All right.
Oh, sorry.
All right. This is key, the fundamental right to clean, healthy waters, right off the bat. Identify one subject suing state agencies for harm or threatened harm. This is the purpose from which all else flows. It all flows from this. And then we have to identify what's in the proposed amendment. So we have definitions. We have to identify affected constitutional provisions and so all in 75 words, right? So this is the way we've done that. And we provide for remedies and selection and enforcement. We tell them that we're going to allow for attorney's fees and expert witnesses to prevailing plaintiffs, just so that they don't say that we don't mislead anybody. This is exactly what we're doing. And we provide for equitable remedies, including restoration of waters. We're not hiding the ball in any way. This is completely transparent. Want to say anything about that? Okay. Oh, and this, the purpose section, I love the purpose section. And a lot of the rights of nature folks had a lot of input on this language. You know, and I just love this, that we tell them where we're coming from, why we need this, reminding them that waters are, it sustains all forms of life and all the substantial interests that there are. They, and although there is so much attention, so much legislation, indeed, we have another provision in the Constitution that has not corrected the degradation of waters in the state of Florida. We have all of this environmental legislation, all of this environmental protection, and guess what? Manatees are dying. Guess what? The farm workers in Apopka, you know, who grew our tomatoes for so many years are dying of cancer. Guess what? Right? So it has not corrected it. And so the poor condition of the waters led us to create this inherent fundamental right. And the why we're focusing on state executive agencies, they are instrumental in protecting as well as harming the waters. And so to do this, so this is how we got this goal, with the aspiration that waters in the state of Florida will one day flourish. Although we have a bottom line, we are looking to the future of flourishing of waters. So this is to guide the courts when they're interpreting what in the world this is about. So next section, do I need to speed up?
Nope, doing great.
Here we go. This is perhaps the most important part of this amendment. People have the inherent political power to create the fundamental right. We, the people, it's inherent. Nobody is giving it to us. It is something that we have as a matter of right. State constitutions have this. Federal constitutions don't. So we have this inherent right to create the fundamental right to clean, healthy waters. And that's exactly what we do. We hereby declare the fundamental right to clean and healthy waters. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, that is the most important provision. Okay, and then we say what can't be done. It's unlawful for a state executive agency, as we're defining it, to harm or threaten to harm Florida waters in these ways. So this is our single subject. You know, we are not going to have everybody, or we're not going to have waters be able to sue. We're not going to do this. You know, it is unlawful for the state executive agency, which is probably the most critical entities, if you will, in the state of Florida regarding water, to home to this fundamental right. Enforcement can be done by a person, as we define it, can sue for injunctive declaratory relief. They don't need to exhaust administrative remedies. You don't need to allege special or direct injury. So we're addressing those particular hurdles as we go along. It's considered off the bat, straight de novo. This is what the state has to do to show a compelling state interest that was narrowly tailored. When you have a fundamental right, as Maya told us, they have to show that there's a compelling state interest for degrading our waters. This narrowly tailored. I'd like to see them do that. I really would. And, oh, this is important for all the law students here, okay? Torts, you ready for some torts? The problem is this. You have multiple parties degrading water. Multiple parties are, you know, like Lake Apopka. That's one of the key reasons that the farm workers could not sue or get relief, because of the multiple parties. So, and where you have multiple parties, and the standard causation is that, you know, if, you know, one party, if their action, if you take away their action and the harm is still caused, you know, they're, you know, not liable, okay? And then so take the other party. If their harm is taken away and the harm is still caused, they're not liable. Nobody is liable under the standard causation test. We address this directly, okay? If they are a substantial factor, they're still liable, even if other parties are involved. So we tell judges exactly the standards to apply. So many of our constitutional provisions that were struck down or found not enforceable didn't have standards in them like this. So that's what we do there. We have declaratory relief, equitable relief, and this is important, restoring waters. We want to restore the waters to the condition that existed prior to the violation. Restoration of waters. How many are in? Okay, great. And also, so that there are ways, you know, means for people to actually sue to do this, we're providing for prevailing plaintiff attorney's fees and expert witness fees. And there is, there's grounds for allowing this to happen. Definitions, now, Mel, it's your turn.
Okay. So the definitions are going to be making or breaking, especially making or breaking lawsuits, especially post-enactment, of course. Because the opposing party, whatever state executive agency is as a defendant, are going to be trying to poke holes at what this is, what it means, whether it applies to them. So again, one of the reasons why it's so detailed is because we wanted to ensure that the definitions were clear, not just to the average person, the average defendant, potential defendant, but also to the court. The court needs explicit guidance in how to render the decision of whether or not a violation occurred or otherwise, what to do with it. So clean and healthy waters are free from harm, are waters free from harm or threat of harm that occurs after the effective date, of course, of this section. So that is just a simple definition of clean and healthy waters. Just free from harm. So not harm is what we're going for. And I just wanted to make a small point regarding the threat of harm. We did wrestle with the idea or possibility of further defining what threat meant or what it could mean, but we ultimately decided that it is something that is not only within probably the judicial purview to develop in case law, but also it's pretty plain meaning. We all know what a threat is. It helps to provide an additional dimension, a forward temporal, future generations dimension of making sure that what we're doing will not contribute to harm in the future. So a lot of scientific issues are going to be brought in. Yes.
Yeah, threat of harm. The statutes in Florida defining pollution define them in terms of potentially harmful. So we are right in harmony. This is nothing new. This is nothing different to say threat of harm. So what we're doing also, you know, flows right along. We have some very strong statutes in the state of Florida regarding pollution. Strict liability, potentially injurious or harmful language. Very, very good. So we are, you know, harmonious with that whole body of law.
Great point, thank you. We're not too radical. We're just trying to ensure that the government does its job, that's all. So the rest of the part of the definition is not really the definition itself, it's indicators of what to look for when you have waters that are clean and healthy. So you can read it for yourself, but it's really an ecocentric type of observation that, it's safe for people and critters that are going to be using the water. It's going to be sufficient for habitats, water filtration, making the ecosystem, aquatic ecosystem is healthy and thriving. So if you have any questions about those indicators, just let us know. And then harm, of course, is probably the big one. And harm means the introduction of pathogens, contaminants, toxins actually, into waters, or the disruption of natural hydrological or ecological processes or functions of waters. That's a mouthful, but intentionally so, unfortunately. But it's something that we have to be clear that it's not only pollution, but it's what you do to the aquatic ecosystem that messes it up. And that can be anything from, chemical, biological, physical stressors, say the aqua, that system, continuing harm there it could be, point of issue here. Anything that contributes to unnatural water levels or nutrient loads. Drawing 1 million gallons a day out of a fragile water system, for instance. It's all going to be, of course, evidence specific, and then how your case flows is going to be based on what you're able to bring into the case. But a lot of these issues can be addressed that Florida is facing up and down the state. So yes, habitat, vegetation, slowing the edge of waters, which is an important issue when, especially in Florida. We can talk about that later as well if you'd like, all the time we have. Go ahead. So we also define person and state executive agencies, state executive agencies to include pretty much the agencies themselves and whoever's in charge of the agency. So again, it's not a personal thing. It's not, them in their personal capacity, but if they have an official responsibility to comply with the Constitution, they're probably going to be named in the pleading. So that's, go ahead.
Yes, and again, we comply with Florida statutes, with the definition of state agency in the Florida statutes, except we have left out local entities, because that would mean that we wouldn't have a single subject. So we're not going to go there, even that we could go there, but we're not. It's risk, benefit, every single word. So we left out all the local agencies that were defined as state agencies here in Florida statutes, and we just put in exactly the other ones. So we're just, again, harmonious with Florida statutes.
And I've gotten some questions about, well, what about, the terrible cities or the polluters themselves, the corporations themselves, can you reach them? Or the federal government, can you reach them? Every actor that does anything within the state of Florida is doing it with the permission of the state of Florida. That is the main thing to remember here. And one of the reasons why we feel safe and assured that just focusing on the state executive branch level is going to be enough to reach everything. Okay, so waters, just about everything you want to protect. Other constitutional provisions, like we said, there was some debate whether or not it was necessary. Again, lowest common denominator, we just threw it in just in case. As well as the self-executing, effective date, severability, those are normal boilerplate type of provisions. So it's good. Right.
Well, self-executing, okay. How many law students do we have? Okay, self-executing, is that important? Yes. It's important because if it is not self-executing, then the legislature can come in and legislate and provide all sorts of standards and muckety muck legislative nullification of constitutional amendments. We saw that with felons voting, right? We've seen that with several other amendments. So now they may not accept that it is self-executing, but we're putting it out there as best we can.
Yeah, so we have a few questions based on the proposed language before we get into the focus on water. We have quite a few questions about that, but a few people have asked, how would this apply to previously contaminated waters? And somebody else asked, will existing harmful activities be grandfathered in? Things like that. Can you speak to that?
I think no.
Sure, thank you, thank you. So again, with the ex post facto doctrine, you can't bring anything under this particular amendment that occurred before it becomes in effect, right? However, if there is a policy, a state executive branch policy of inaction that allows for continued harm, that's actionable. If there is a point of solution that, I hate to use the word point, but if there's a source of pollution that existed beforehand and is ongoing right after the effective date, that's actionable. Okay, so once you stop all the sources of pollution and you give nature time to reset, to flush itself out, over time, it'll bounce back. So some water bodies might need a little help, restoration, scraping out legacy lows of phosphate or whatnot. But as far as what is actionable under this particular amendment, it is harm, continuing harm, harm in the form of inaction. So, yes.
And I just want to offer that that's not unique or different. That's in every state. And so if you have an industrial discharger and they've got their permit, they're operating, the Constitution passes, they're going to keep operating, but somewhere in the near term, they have to get another permit. And then during that next permit, that becomes an opportunity to take a look at what's being permitted. Is it so much you're going to have another environmental, sacrifice zone? Is it so much, you've got kids that are getting cancer or who can't learn in school because of, I'm saying into the air, say here to the water, of course, but that they're now, the contamination is getting into the drinking water and it's having devastating effects. That permit is a new action. And so sometimes it's going to be inaction, sometimes it's going to be an ongoing condition, but there's a new step the government has taken to allow it to continue. So I just want to say that's not unique. So much of what's here is not unique to Florida. There are some elements that are unique, that you have to do the single subject rule, that focus on the levels of government. And that's why Florida's Green Amendment is different than every other in terms of length and detail. But there are so many of these things that it's not unique or different. It's part of the way environmental law works everywhere.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, so to move specifically to those questions about this focus on water that we see more often than not. So there's two different types of questions that we're getting. One is a broader question of, is pursuing the right to clean water just too narrow? Should we not be, pursuing the right to a clean environment, to, air, water, earth, all of that? But then more specifically, we have some questions about how that right to clean water functions. And one of the questions is, does the Florida right to clean water extend to the aquifer? If so, how about water bodies that extend outside of Florida? How about oceans, coastlines? Surface waters are pretty easy to identify, but identifying wetlands is a difficult process. So how does the amendment address these situations? So that's really open to the whole panel. First, about why are we focusing on water, and then how specifically does even that focus work?
So I think, again, just water, because anything outside of water will probably bounce us out of this process. And when we're talking about waters, the way we just listed it in the definition itself, so it's probably worth going over very quickly. Waters refers to the aquatic ecosystems of aquifers, bays, creeks, estuaries, estuarine systems, lagoons, lakes, rivers, riverine systems, springs, streams, wetlands, intracoastal and coastal waters within the boundaries of the state of Florida, and shall include the natural tributaries and artificial waterways which impact these water bodies. This term shall include fresh, brackish, saline, tidal, surface, ground, and underground water associated with these water bodies. So it's a pretty comprehensive list of Florida waters, but it does have to be in Florida within our territorial jurisdiction. There could probably be an argument made that if someone in Georgia is bothering our, our waters in Florida, then, may or may not be useful here. So that's something for the courts to render. But so I think with regard to identifying what wetlands are and things like that, there's a lot of good science and regulation already, standards out there already that I don't think we have to build a new wheel for. But in the sense that we want to protect what is good for Florida, good for Floridians, that'll be probably part of the, the standing issue of what our zone of interest are as each case rules out. So going back to the purpose statement, how does that water body really affect us? It's really a public interest cause of action. Pretty wide.
Yeah, and I just want to say, I've already had a couple of times here in Florida, but I hear it a lot in other states. Well, what about something Alabama is doing, or something Georgia is doing, or something somebody else is doing that's causing harm here in Florida? The Florida State Constitution applies to Florida state government officials. And in this case, in this amendment, as defined in the amendment. So you are not going to be able to use the Florida State Constitution to go to Georgia and say, we have a constitutional right here, you Georgia got to do whatever, right? So we're always going to be looking for that state action that meets the constitutional language that we can grab a hold of, action or inaction. Now, this amendment specifically says action or inaction. Many of the states that have language going forth say action or inaction, but I would also, some of them don't, because I would suggest to you it is sort of a standard principle of law, particularly environmental law, that inaction is action. And we get that there's a lot of court interpretation, but we just really want to remember, we're thinking about Florida State Constitution that applies to Florida state actors. It's not going to apply to the federal government. And it's not going to apply to another state. That is why we need Georgia to have a constitutional green amendment. That is why we need a federal green amendment. That's how we're going to lift all boats.
There is a question about that. It says, how long do you think it will take to get to the critical mass of states to move this to the federal level?
I think that's going to be, we're going to know organically, right? I think it's really hard. It depends on how the movement's going to advance. I would like to see it happen within 5 years. But the movement is growing fast. People get this. One of the beautiful things about this is you don't have to be a constitutional law expert. You don't have to be a law expert. In fact, I will tell you that most constitutional law experts don't understand how a green amendment works. And it breaks my brain. And I don't know why I have arguments with them all the time, because it acts like every other constitutional provision. Of course, everybody up here is spooked, but it is really, but the beautiful thing, I mean, we have high school students. Some of our best leaders in New Jersey are high school students, because we can all get it. Right? Somebody starts throwing law and stuff at you. You say, I'm a person here on this earth. I have a right to clean water. You're my government official. You don't have the right to sacrifice me or my family or my water so that industry over there can make more friggin' money. We know it on a heart level. We can tell stories about people in our communities, things we read in the newspaper about how people in communities and kids and environments are being devastatingly sacrificed, right? And those are stories that tug on the hearts and the brains and the minds and the emotions of decision makers. Not every decision makers. There are a lot of shitty decision makers out there, right? Who don't really care, but most do. And you tell that really true story. That's usually enough to get somebody to rethink a bad position on this issue. Not always, but enough. So we all know enough. You know enough, law student, lawyer or not. You know enough to be the best, most effective advocate for your constitutional right to clean water.
Thank you. And I think that that moves us perfectly into the last topic of the questions that we're getting. And that is, where are we in Florida right now? A lot of people are asking how many petitions we have, what more needs to be done. So I think if we can end this with making sure everybody knows how they can get involved and what work needs to be done, that would be a great way to wrap this up.
Okay, so I guess that's me. But I believe that when we try to estimate the numbers, and it's difficult because there could be like piles of signed petitions sitting at home with various volunteers throughout the state, which is fine. And honestly, we don't really, the supervisors of election offices don't want them piecemeal. They just rather have them dropped off in large quantities. But to gain an idea, and what we did before the holiday season started was, I think someone estimated about 10,000. So we have a long way to go. And I think it was mentioned that we're self-imposing a benchmark deadline looking at March 1st to reach our 223,000 goal to trigger the Florida Supreme Court review. All right, so one of the beautiful benefits of Maya agreeing and generously donating her time and, good Lord, energy for 2 weeks in Florida is to help, not only with the awareness of what this is and what it can do, but what everyone can do right now, what needs to happen right now if we all really want this, if it's something that actually we do care about. If we're taking this seriously, what can we do? So to answer that question, the tangible answer is we need signatures. So on an individual and organic way, make sure that every registered voter in your life, please print out, sign, mail out a petition, which can be found on the website, FloridaRightToCleanWater.org. Now, if you have the time, a couple hours here or there, either on the weekends or whenever you might have time, we would love to connect with you and let you know where maybe a local community event is happening, an opportunity where you and other volunteers can go and collect hundreds of petitions and signatures. All right, those types of communications are why we're hoping people connect in and register with us as ambassadors, as businesses, as nonprofit organizations. The Unite for Clean Water effort is a way that we are registering people that are focused on the next couple months, because that type of communication, the feedback, the notification of not only information, but opportunities is critical. And one of the reasons why I'm so happy that Maya, again, is generously providing space on her app is that is something, not everyone's on Facebook, and Facebook is really the only tool right now that is good for organizing. Mm-hmm. So when we are connected by an app that provides you a notification of what's going on, what you can do, what other people are doing, ideas, the whole thing, it's all very organic and about connections. So bottom line, get connected and do whatever you can with what you have, wherever you are. And if you don't like, going to people and talking to them about it, or just asking a very simple question, would you like to have the right to clean water? Which oftentimes is enough for someone to say, yes, where do I sign? But if you're not comfortable with that, there are a lot of behind the scenes type of work that still needs to be done. And if you're in the room, we can talk right now with Cheryl, who is the expert in our campaign regarding that regard. But it's something that everyone can do something with whatever you have, with whatever time you have, capabilities, skills, talents. It's about what you can think of in your respective sphere of influence and capabilities, and how to help support this particular effort, which again, it's probably the most important thing that I've ever come across in my life. Hope you agree.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you to our entire panel, to our special guest, Maya. One more round of applause for everyone. Come to a close. If you are seeking CLE credits, you will see a code behind me.
Oh.
Please copy that down. You need it. If you are online, it should be on your screen right now. Please copy that down. I will leave it up for a few minutes. It has been up for a while for people who are online, but give everybody a moment to get that. If you are in person and seeking CLE credit, we do have a sign-in sheet. If you wouldn't mind just signing it, that'll just help us to verify if anybody asks if you were here or not. In addition, we also have, I think, there we go. So here's a couple of the websites that have been mentioned today. You can find all of the links to all of our speakers, to all of the initiatives that were talked about, basically everything on the Earth Juris site under this events page. Everything is linked in there. But please also go check out directly the forthegenerations.org and the FloridaRightToCleanWater.org. You'll find all the information you're looking for there. And if you very much enjoyed this, if you know somebody else who would be interested, who was not able to make it today, there are still a few more dates on Maya's tour throughout Florida. So be sure to check this out. This flyer is also posted on all of our stuff. And so we also have copies of the petition here as well that can be signed. And we will also have that linked on the event page as well. Any final thoughts before? Okay, that was great. Thank you again to everybody, and we will officially bring it to a close.